Welcome to day one of the Zoey Sewalong. Let's start by gathering your supplies. You're going to need your instructions, your fabric. You'll also want some coordinating thread, sewing machine needles that are for stretch fabrics, and some optional notions including heat and bond soft stretch and also spray starch. I'll be using both of these things in the sew-along, but they're not necessary. Your fabric should have at least 25% stretch. To make sure that it does, cut a piece that's 4 inches wide and hold it up against the black rectangle on your stretch chart in your instructions. On the right side, pull towards the right and make sure that that right end stretches to at least the 25% stretch mark. If you're printing and assembling your pattern at home, be sure to check out page 3 of your instructions. You can turn on and off different sizes, so you're only printing the size that you want to cut out, and you only need to print certain pages per view. If you're assembling your pattern at home, you're going to want to cut off the edges and tape it together. There's lots of different ways to do this, but I find that the simplest way is to use a paper cutter. I stack the pages about 3 to 5 deep, and I cut off just the top and the right sides. And then you're going to tape them together. You overlap one of the cut edges with a non-cut edge, line up those gray circles, and then tape it wherever there is a pattern. And once you've taped together all of your pattern pieces, you're going to go ahead and cut them out. If you want to lengthen or shorten your pattern pieces, you can. Notice that there's a lengthen shorten marking on your pattern pieces. Depending on which view you're sewing, there might be multiple of those. I'm going to shorten my top by 1/2 inch. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line parallel to the lengthen shorten line just below it at 1/2 inch. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut along that lengthen shorten line. And then I'm going to tape that lengthen shorten line so that it lines up with that new marking that I made. Make sure that your grain line matches up and is nice and straight. So for this top piece, since it's the front, that is along the center front line. And tape it in place. And then if the side seam gets a little bit off, you're going to go ahead and smooth that out with your scissors. Now it's time to cut out your fabric. I like to use these pattern weights and a rotary cutter, but you can also just use pins and also scissors, whatever you prefer. When cutting your notches, remember that the seam allowance is only 3/8 inch, so make sure that you cut those little notches no longer than 1/4 inch. When cutting your straps, which is pattern piece 9, remember that you need to cut 2 and that they need to be a pair. So make sure that your second one, you flip the pattern piece upside down so that it's a pair and not exactly the same as the first strap. On lots of knit fabrics, it can be really hard to tell the right and the wrong side of the fabric. So what I do is I take a really washable marker and I just put a little marking on the wrong side of each of my straps and bands. It's time to prep all of our straps and our bands. I'm going to be using the Heat and Bond Soft Stretch and the starch. Once again, you don't need to use those, but I do think it makes it a lot easier and gives you a much more professional finish. So first, I'm going to take this first strap and I'm going to spray it with spray starch. Next, I'm going to fold it in half, wrong sides touching, and I'm going to give it a nice press. Now that that is pressed, open it back up and you're going to fold the top edge, or the edge without any of the notches, down by 3/8 of an inch. Now I just eyeball this, but if you want to measure it and be more exact, that is totally fine too. Now I'm going to take my Heat and Bond Soft Stretch and I'm going to tear off a piece that's the same length as my strap. The Heat and Bond has a web adhesive on one side and then a paper backing on the other. You're going to put the web adhesive against the top folded edge of your strap. You'll notice that that 3/8 of an inch fold is still folded down when you're doing this. And then use the heat of your iron to adhere that web adhesive to the wrong side of your strap fabric. Then you're just going to fold it up against that middle fold line again, and then you'll set it aside. You're going to let it kind of cool down before you take off that paper backing. Now repeat those same steps for your other strap and the front and the back neck bands. I'm going to go ahead and make those same markings with a washable marker on the wrong side of my front and back as well, just so that I don't get them confused. Now, if you're sewing a view C, which is the dress view of the Zoey, you're going to need to go ahead and sew up the center front and center back seams. So you'll line them up, right sides touching along that center front and center back seam, pin them, sew them at 3/8 of an inch, and then press that seam allowance either open or to one side so that it's prepped and ready as just a solid front and solid back for the rest of the instructions. And that's it for today. We're essentially all prepped and ready to start sewing tomorrow on day 2 of the Zoey Sewalong.